optimist communicator, Truman, straightforward honest, and Eisenhower, amiable shrewd. Throughout his European travels, he constantly invoked the need to re-energize the grand anti-fascist alliance of 1941 to 1945, which led to victory in World War II. Only this time around, Reagan believed, the global democratic crusade had a new enemy, the Soviet Union, a.k.a. the Evil Empire. On June 5th, Reagan gave a well-rehearsed radio address from the Palace of Versailles, in which the time-honored memory of D-Day, particularly the vigilant leadership of Winston Churchill, Charles de Gaulle, and Franklin D. Roosevelt, was given a fulsome embrace. France may have helped the United States win at Yorktown, but, Reagan insisted, America repaid the favor in spades 163 years later at Normandy. One lesson of D-Day is as clear now as it was 38 years ago, Reagan stated in his radio broadcast, which aired that day in the United States. Only strength can deter tyranny and aggression. In taped remarks for French television, Reagan echoed the same sentiment. D-Day was a success, he said, and the Allies had breached Hitler's seawall. They swept into Europe, liberating towns and cities and countrysides until the Axis powers were finally crushed. We remember D-Day because the French, British, Canadian, and Americans fought shoulder to shoulder for democracy and freedom, and won. The term D-Day was not coined for the Allied invasion. The same moniker was given to the attack date of nearly every offensive during World War II. It was first coined during World War I, before the massive U.S. attack at the Battle of Saint-Mihiel in France on September 12, 1918. The D was shorthand for day. The expression literally meant day-day and signified the day of an attack. By the end of World War II, however, the expression was synonymous with only one date, June 6, 1944. Evoking the fact that over 150,000 Allied troops had stormed the Normandy coast 38 years before at the cost of more than 10,500 dead, wounded, or missing men, Reagan pledged that America would do it again if it meant freeing France from a totalitarian aggressor like the Soviet Union. In the second year of his presidency, the resurrection of D-Day, the greatest amphibious landing in world history, as a defining moment in recent American history, was already a central part of his anti-Soviet Cold War policy. He closed his radio remarks by reading President Franklin D. Roosevelt's inspired D-Day prayer to the nation. According to historian John Meacham, author of Franklin and Winston, when FDR had read the prayer on the radio, he was playing the part of national pastor. Now Reagan, in a far less dramatic historical moment, was doing the same. 2 years later, on June 6, 1984, Reagan came back to France for the 40th anniversary of D-Day. The emotive speech he delivered at the windswept Normandy promontory, looking out over the English Channel, known now in history as the Boys of Pointe du Hoc address, was the opening salvo to a new American indebtedness to World War II veterans. By honoring the daring action of the 2nd Ranger Battalion, 225 young Army volunteers whose mission was to climb the treacherous 100-foot-high Pointe du Hoc cliff while being shot at by entrenched German soldiers, he was paying tribute to an entire generation. Out of those 225 boys, only 99 survived the amphibious assault. Later that afternoon, the President also gave a stirring oration at Omaha Beach, not far from where the plaque on a bronze memorial statue honors the spirit of American youth rising from the waves. By the 1980s, these youths were aging gray hairs, the new old. Pointe du Hoc and Omaha Beach were Reagan's signature moments, Ken Duberstein, a former White House chief of staff, recalled. If I have one enduring memory of Reagan, it's the way he crisply saluted World War II veterans that afternoon. These were his guys. Then there was the moving visual of Reagan walking with Nancy amongst all the grave sites, which looked like miles and miles of white crosses. That was an unforgettable moment of absolute reverence for the World War II vets. As president, Ronald Reagan delivered 3 unforgettable speeches: Pointe du Hoc, the Challenger disaster, and the Berlin Tear Down This Wall number. But, Duberstein concludes, it was the first of these, Pointe du Hoc, that set the tone for the others. Before Reagan dubbed the 2nd Ranger Battalion the Boys of Pointe du Hoc, they were known as Rudder's Rangers, named after their feisty, tough-minded commanding officer, Colonel James Earl Rudder. Historian Ronald L. Lane's Rudder's Rangers, first published in 1979, remains the indispensable book on the World War II years of this remarkable fighting man. Another invaluable book on the battalion is Robert W. Black's Riveting Rangers in World War II, a definitive popular study of these elite fighting men. From an archival perspective, the Eisenhower Center for American Studies at the University of New Orleans, of which I served as director from 1994 to 2004, has numerous transcribed oral histories of various U.S. Army 2nd Battalion survivors. Never before have these oral histories been so fully tapped as in the writing of this book. What distinguishes this deliberation from other D-Day narratives is the interweaving of the Battle of Pointe du Hoc, June 6, 1944, with the ascendance of President Ronald Reagan's new patriotism, June 6, 1984. With the assistance of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California, I've been able to document how and why our 40th president played a seminal role in launching the great reappreciation of World War II veterans that swept over America in the 1980s and continues today largely unabated. If it hadn't been for Reagan's 2 elegiac June 6, 1984 homilies, written by Peggy Noonan, Pointe du Hoc, and Anthony Dolan, Omaha Beach, there may never have been Stephen Ambrose's Band of Brothers, Tom Brokaw's The Greatest Generation, Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan, or numerous memorials like the National D-Day Museum in New Orleans, built to exalt the citizen soldiers who liberated Europe. As biographer Lou Cannon wrote, Reagan's performance in Normandy demonstrated the timing, dramatic sense, and attention to detail for which the White House staff was famous during his presidency. It was reporter Michael Dobbs of the Post who best put his finger on the 1980s-style new patriotism which was unleashed across America to commemorate D-Day plus 40 years. 40 years after D-Day, Normandy is bracing itself for a new invasion of a foreign army of 30,000 war veterans, journalists, television crews, tourists, and Secret Service agents, with 5 monarchs, 2 presidents, and a platoon of prime ministers in the vanguard, Dobbs forecasted on June 1, 1984. He went on, "For the politicians, notably President Reagan, the 40th anniversary of the D-Day landings can be seen as a valuable public relations exercise at a time when election campaigns are in progress on both sides of the Atlantic. For the press and television, it represents one of the most colorful international news events since Britain's royal wedding 3 years ago. For veterans, most of them now well over 60, the ceremonies could turn out to be the last opportunity for recapturing memories about the most momentous day in their lives. According to officials at the U.S. cemetery in France, a surprising number are taking advantage of retirement to return for the first time with their wives and families." And return they did that June. Anywhere from 10,000 to 15,000 U.S. D-Day veterans made the transatlantic odyssey. Their reasons for doing so were legion. Nearly all, however, wanted to pay obeisance to the past, to those armed forces members who had perished for freedom during the Second World War. The pre-anniversary D-Day hype orchestrated by the Reagan administration allowed many of these veterans, for the first time, to finally debrief their unknowing wives and children and grandchildren about the grotesque horrors they had witnessed. No more buried remembrances. With Reagan as president, the time had come for the World War II generation to speak out, even if it was a psychologically gut-wrenching proposition. By 1984, the stars were aligned for thousands of these stoic war heroes to finally offer eyewitness testimonials for posterity's sake. It was, in essence, a generational reckoning. Although these veterans had been allergic to boasting, President Reagan and the national media convinced them that telling what happened was their final duty to their country. Just as Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower had ordered the U.S. Army to film the concentration camps immediately after their liberation,